good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Regional Delivery Committee, and I will call on the on to the Karakia. Councillor Swiggers.
Whakatau te hau ki te hui, te hau ki te whonga, he mā kina ki uta, he mā taratara ki tai. He ake ane e akakura, he tia, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, maunga yora.
I call on Councillor Cranwell, who's pretty good.
Nā tururu te koukou mai nei ki hai mā, he titi ki hai mā rakaraka tūpapu o te ruru te reko. Hepo, hei ao kāwa titi, hei wā mauri ora. Kia rātou mā koe atu ki te pō i tēnei wiki, tēnei marama, tēnei tau, moi mai rā, oki mai. Kari mātou, wari tia i o koutou, koe hati ki te pō, o takahia tara whānui o tāne. Moi mai, oki mai. Ingi tū heitia, puta tau, te whero tua whitu ki ruka, te ariki nui kuini, ngā wai hono i te pō, i raro. E te kuini, nei te mihi kia koe, i tēnei wā, pai mārere kia koe, mō tō nohonga, i te ahurei mō ngā tau ki te heki mai nei, pai mārere. Nā reira, koutou mā, ko tau mai i tēnei rā, nei rā no te mihi kia koutou. Kia kōrua Ken Hughey nau mai hoki mai. Pai ki kitea ia kōrua, kōrero e pāna. E nei rā, mātuku hu repo, ngā manu rangatira no reira tēnā kōrua. Koutou katoa ko rau e ko mai i tēnei rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tata.
Welcome to the meeting, and I've been informed that the quorum present, and I'm pleased to keep the meeting open. Full apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Sacknell, Councillor McKenzie, Councillor Karakia, Councillor Boucher, sorry, will be online. And I have Chair Scott's an apology. Conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest to items on today's agenda? We'll move on to public forums and petitions. The forums today have Ken Hughey, supported by Peter Langham, here today to speak in relation to Bitcoin farming. And we can save it and have a bit and work together. So I'll ask you two to come to the table. Just 10 minutes to speak, and we'll start in 5 minutes. And the councillors after that can ask questions.
Kia tātou. Big thanks, Nick, and everyone for the opportunity to present here this morning. We had planned to only speak for 7 minutes, so we might waffle for a couple more, but we'll see how we go, being renowned as a waffler. So really want to spend some quality time with you today talking about a vision around farming Britain. And I've used that analogy or metaphor because I think that's what we essentially have to do. If we want to save matuku huripo, we have to think big. We have to farm their way out of trouble. And I think this council and others in Canterbury are in a great position to be able to do that. So up here, Peter and I have got a draft vision for Huripo, and we think we can achieve this in a relatively short period of time because where there's a will, there's a way. So what we think, we can have a thriving population of the species in Canterbury within 15 years. And we don't have that at the moment, and we'll come to that, based on a focused and large-scale approach at Te Wahora, Lake Ellesmere, assisted by some other complementary work elsewhere, for example, at the Waimakariri river mouth. So I just want to talk a little bit about the species for a couple of minutes. The species is a bird of our wetlands. It's brown, stocky, and rarely seen. I'm guessing that a large number of people in this room will have never seen this species in Canterbury. Fortunately, I've been lucky enough to see quite a few, Peter's seen a lot more, and there's probably some others that may have as well, and that's great because they are an amazing species. It's thought to number less than 1,000 in New Zealand, and maybe a few more than that in Australia, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 in Australia, but that's it. There aren't many around, and it's declining very rapidly. And it's defined as a threatened national critical species under the DOC Threatened Species Management Ranking System. We think we face losing this species in Canterbury within a few years, with possibly only around 30 present in the region. My guess, Peter, is that a little more than a few decades ago, it would have numbered maybe in the low hundreds in the region, and before that, probably a lot more. So that's an indication that numbers have declined absolutely hugely in the region as habitat is lost, food supply is reduced, and predation has occurred. Peter's been working on the species, and I've seen a lot as well. And we've both worked on the species, not together, but in separate sorts of places. Peter, locally, and maybe, Peter, just for a minute or so, you could just tell us what you've been doing over the last year or so in particular.
Yeah, well, over the last 2 years, I've actually been working on photo identification of individual birds, primarily around Te Waihora, doing most of my work at this time of year, just before the breeding season, to minimise disturbance to birds. Through that, I can get an idea of the numbers of birds, the age of the birds, and an indication of the sex of the birds. So this season, I've photo ID'd 11 individual bitterns around Te Waihora, of which 7 to 8 are adult males. 2 to 3 are immature juvenile birds, and I've only been able to photograph 1 adult female bird. So we've got concerns that there may be a male-dominated population of Matuku haripo, and that may be a nationwide concern as well. So yeah, Te Waihora does appear to be the stronghold for the species within the Waitaha region. There is a smaller population at Te Ruakaka on the south side of the Waimakariri, although the habitat there is rapidly changing for the species. So yeah, really Te Waihora is the focus, especially the northern and western side of the lake. We've got concerns because not only is it habitat, but also food supply. In the last decade, we've had 8 near-fledgling bittern chicks found totally emaciated, and they haven't been able to get over that threshold to fledge. And that's a real concern that we've had 8 in a decade, given the cryptic nature of the species. Astoundingly, earlier this year, a fledgling turned up in Leaston Township, probably walked up a series of drain systems from Te Waihora, and went into a bird rescue centre, but unfortunately didn't survive. So the species is giving us a message that it's struggling. I guess I got a message very strongly myself when I accidentally ran over a bittern fledgling 5 years ago at Motukarara. It was standing on the road. It wouldn't move when I approached, and I couldn't swerve to avoid it because I was coming up to a corner. After hitting the bird, I realised it was a Matuku haripo. I picked it up, and it was like a rag doll. It was just skin and bones, totally emaciated. So it's really personal to me. It's I think the bird's given me a message that it's in a really bad way. I've done a region-wide survey funded actually by Environment Canterbury to identify where bittern are in the region. And other than Te Waihora and Te Ruakaka, there's just a scattering of birds in the region and no indications of any other regional strongholds at this stage.
Thanks very much, Peter. So moving on quickly, recognising time is moving on. We think that Matuku haripo is like the canary in the coal mine in terms of wetlands in Canterbury and also around the country. If we lose this, I think it sends some other signals about what we're losing in terms of our wetland conservation and wetland ecosystem services in the region. Bitterns need wetlands, there's no question about that. The thing is, though, they have this really large home range size of around 40 to 50 hectares per pair. That is large, and hence, to get a population of around about 15 pairs, we need large, either contiguous or semi-contiguous areas of wetland that are carefully managed for the species. And if we do that, we'll get lots of other advantages for other species as well. But the thing is about the species and wetlands we need, they need to be raupo dominated.
Yeah, the Department of Conservation has really strong data showing that rāpō is a predominant habitat used by bittern, and that's been done by doc scientist Emma Williams and Colin O'Donnell. They've found that. I'll
Let's
just
stop with that.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so we're proposing a new farming venture for Canterbury with an initial focus on Te Waihora Lake Ellesmere, which I talked about earlier on. This experience we've learnt from Australia in the rice growing regions of the Riverina around the Victoria, South Australia border, where they've found that bitterns, when carefully managed, are using the rice fields, not surprisingly, as prime feeding areas. And if they complement those feeding areas with intensified and strategic predator control, they can boost the numbers of bittern relatively easily. And we think that's why we can farm them out of potential oblivion here in Canterbury, because actually we know from experience that works elsewhere. So we're proposing not growing rice in Canterbury, but growing raupo. And growing that raupo will have lots of other ecosystem services and other advantages as well. It will require quite a large area. I've mentioned 1,000 hectares. Let's be aspirational. That's really large. The lake's around 25,000 hectares. Its edges are large. But as Peter talked about, in that area on that northern side of the lake, there are vast opportunities to do some really good work here, and we could make a big advantage. So it is doable. If we have the vision, we all work together, this is something that will work. So that will deliver a lot of other services as well. We think it will deliver tourism, Whakakapi, and a range of other advantages. It won't be cheap. Not asking ECAM for the money. What we're asking for is leadership across the region to take advantage of this opportunity, because we think there's a growing willingness and support for actually dealing with the canary in the gold mine. So next steps, they're simple. Someone needs to take the lead, sell the vision, get everyone committed, draw up a plan and just do it. And so really pleased to have had this opportunity to present to you. Quite happy to take some questions. Thank you, Nick.
So much for your presentation, and in particular, Peter, who, you know, has talked to us before on vision. I understand your concerns. And I just guess I would like an indication of other areas in Canterbury that may have been once a stronghold. From what I gather, sort of the Pines Ashburton area was as well. And I have seen a bit flew over me on the motorway around Hallsville area, where there obviously used to be a bit of a wetland in there. Well, there's still remnants, but so, yeah, and I've let Peter know.
I'll pass that over to Peter. I was lucky enough to see 5 one day at Te Waihora Lake Ellesmere, but that was a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, the species has been very widespread throughout all of Aotearoa actually, but all through Canterbury as well. But it's basically just disappeared as wetland habitats have disappeared. Used to be quite a lot of strongholds in the Canterbury foothills. In some of the high country regions, like Coleridge and Otawharakai, also Te Manahua as well. So the species is very widespread, but its decline is really much mirrored by loss of wetland habitat. And so Colin O'Donnell and Hugh Robertson and Doc have done a really good scientific paper showing the rapid decline in the birds' distribution and numbers, mirroring habitat loss.
Is that the main survey area you've got? Have you looked at others to sort of get an indication of if there's other areas? Or?
Yeah, I have surveyed quite widely through the region and also consulted with Doc, who have put lots of automatic sound recorders out. A very small number of birds in Te Manahua and Otawharakai. We do still a little bit data deficient with the waitaki and Kiwainono, but that's an area I hope to survey later this month and next month to get more data. But by far and away, the flushing rates and numbers of birds in Te Waihora just stand head and shoulders above everywhere else in the region. Bittern are highly mobile, so one bittern radio track this year used 30 different wetlands in 20 days. So the species can be highly dispersive and can be seen at lots of locations, but we now are concerned that the same birds are being seen repeatedly. And that's very much a concern. We could actually get a false positive situation where we think there's more bitterns because the birds are active, more mobile, and they're booming and making more calls because of that habitat fragmentation and the fact they're struggling, actually makes the species ironically more conspicuous, even though the numbers may actually be lower. So, but that's why individually recognising birds for me has been a crucial part of the research. Ideally, we would satellite track birds, and that has been done in Canterbury, but at the moment, the Department of Conservation doesn't have the resources to do that within the Canterbury region.
About the fledglings being emaciated and the lack of food obviously is the cause of that. Is the increasing the raupoa area that automatically then enhances the food? Or is there an issue around, because you just said you've got 25,000 hectares of lake, which sounds like a lot of water space for them to be fishing in, but does the food automatically come with the raupoa, or is there other aspects like water quality and things like that need to also be?
Yeah, raupoa is a big factor, but having waterway connectivity, so if we had the large wetland created, especially on the lower Horseville floodplain connected to the river, so having wetland connectivity is really crucial. Raupoa has a certain spacing that allows easy fish movement for tuna and also inaka as well. So raupoa is very pivotal wetland species, but we don't need just raupoa alone. We need wetland connectivity, and we also need some spaces open between the raupoa for the birds to feed. Maybe with some Karakia sector and a little bit of diversity, but waterway connectivity is the real key.
I might just add to that, we have put together a one-pager on this that we submitted as part of the long-term planning process. And in that, I talked about the need for water level management, connectivity and the like that Peter has. It's not just tuna, but juvenile tuna are incredibly important, but bullies and the like are also important. So there's a whole lot of other things that would benefit from that. So it's probably three-pronged. It's about getting the area of habitat, the quality of the habitat, and then predator control to go with that. So that needs an integrated approach.
So in terms of increasing the area, that's around planting. Actually, it's not just enabling it to restore itself; it's actually planting.
I think you'd have to do planting to get the scale and the speed of response that we need. I sort of describe it at the moment, we're getting death by 1,000 cuts. And actually what we need to do is speed up the reverse of that. And to do that, we need to operate at scale, at speed, just do it.
Councillor Burns.
Thanks very much. I just want to acknowledge the work you've been doing. It's brilliant. And Peter, some of the stuff that I've had the opportunity to connect with you, Te Rawakaka, the Kohanga wetlands, those sorts of things we're seeing, or if not seeing, we're certainly hearing them. Councillor Davies, I say that because the first time you never forget your first joke. Mine sort of takes on from what Councillor Southworth said, and it's really about the emaciation. Certainly when I was at Tukatara, it wasn't just the freshwater species or bird life that predominantly were in the wetland area, but everything from little blue penguin, fur seal, pup, whatever. When we would find them dead, they would literally be emaciated. So if we're talking about food, we're talking about fish, we're talking about elvers, the bits and pieces, is there any research being done on fish species, types and numbers within especially Waikato?
I think that's an area that research needs to be done. Some contemporary research does need to be done in that space. We have got some good historic fish survey data from Te Waiwara, but that's dated now, but it will give a comparative set of information. We have got anecdotal information that there's been a crash in the native bully population in Te Waiwara. And that could be it needs more research, basically.
Can I just add a little bit more? That's an interesting point you've just raised there, because I received some stuff from a man named Michael Bates out in Kaiapoi around the lack of bullies in areas whereby they would expect, and previously had large populations. Can I just acknowledge Greg in the back of the room as well, the work you're doing on Te Rawakaka, and long may that survive, because again, that is one of those little holds, I guess, of Bitten and even Craig, I think. So, well done.
Yeah, no, I was just talking to Greg beforehand, I think the council has an excellent resource in helping fill those gaps. And Peter and I were discussing the food chain changes that have occurred over the course of decades in the lake, and actually probably a whole lot earlier as well. But certainly since Wahine and other events that have occurred around the lake, we've seen dramatic flips and flops in the lake. But it's always, and Greg and I absolutely agree on this, it's always retained enormous productivity, but it's the nature of that productivity and the nature of the different food resources that are important for the bittern and related species. But we think with good management, at scale and at speed, we can make the difference.
Sure, thank you.
Cranwell.
Two questions. So is the 1,000 hectares, is that Raupor itself or is that just the area?
So I think what Peter described was a really good description. So Raupo is a metaphor for the area, and that area would comprise plantings of Raupo, areas of water, other species as well. So it would be designed in a way that maximises the opportunity to not only have all of those other species doing well, but for bittern to perform really well in that sort of circumstance. We think South Island furred could also be reintroduced, and other species would absolutely thrive.
So in the Riverina area, the rice area, I suppose, did you know that the research over there, because I think you said the home range was 40 to 50 hectares, that because there was probably abundant of food and concentrated in one area, did their home range decrease?
I don't think we know that yet, but that actually does make sense, and one would expect that the home range in an area managed like this would
So if we
shrink.
kind of had 1,000 hectares and it was prime area, so their home range would decrease, and therefore then I suppose the pairs could increase in the area that.
Yeah, density would likely increase, but again, I think the point I would make, if we could have a vision around the 1,000 hectares, but we can only start with 300, we would start with the 300, and then through adaptive learning, we would get those sort of density lessons, and we might well learn actually in a much smaller area we could do really well. But it can't be too small because, as I said, I think the death by 1,000 cuts is occurring. We're tinkering around the edges, and that tinkering isn't making a real difference.
Councillor Swips.
My main question's been answered, but I wanted to understand what the relationship with DOC would be here. I mean, regional council's got a role, but it's not the be all and end all. So where does DOC sit in this from your point of view? And then what would be a pilot that may be able to work? Because going straight out is not, I mean, I don't particularly understand the science around it and the nuances around maybe some of the anecdotal evidence. I'd like to understand that a bit more, but I'll take that on myself. But is there a pilot that can be done to measure and understand, and then what's DOC's relationship?
So I think those are all great questions, councillor. So I'll try and take them one at a time and quickly. So DOC definitely has a huge role to play here. And as Peter pointed out, Emma Williams and Colin O'Donnell, both co-located in Christchurch, have enormous experience and knowledge in this space. They, of course, also are responsible for some public conservation lands, but so too are other organisations around here. But my personal feeling is, and I used to work for DOC, I was Chief Science Advisor there for 8 years, until relatively recently, is that Environment Canterbury or Kaitahu or someone else that has a bigger picture sort of understanding, I think, of the more global opportunities could take a bigger leadership role. But I think DOC would play an enormous part in providing the science and maybe some of the other management inputs that would be required. So no, they're not left out of the picture at all. They would play an enormous role. Could we do a pilot? I think that's a great question. So I suppose in response to Councillor Cranwell's question, the vision is for a super large area. Certainly the vision in the immediate term isn't for one that's really small, because I don't think it would provide that sort of lesson. So I mentioned 300. I don't know whether it's 100, 200, 300 or 400 as a pilot, but I do think there is an opportunity in that northern part of the lake to get something really substantive going. And if that showed really good promise, scale it up.
nei te mihi kia kōrua mō kōrua mahi hei tiaki nei manu rangatira o te kōtuku o te mautuku whiripo hoki. Nei te mihi kia kōrua. I just want to acknowledge you both first for the work you're doing here. In particular, Peter, I know that all the work that you do sort of out in the field and your relationship that you're sort of growing in this space. So just acknowledging that, and that you took me out, and that's when I saw my first mautuku was with you out at Ahuriri a few months back, and you know, that was an amazing day just to note that you know, that wetland that this organisation helped to create with the community is only a couple of years old, but there was a kautuku there. So what Ian and Peter are telling us can actually, because we've actually already proved that it can work at Ahuriri. So I had 3 questions. The first one, and really quickly, first one is in the Green Park sort of Osborne's Drain area, are there kautuku there?
Yeah, that's a stronghold, Craig, possibly 2 breeding pairs there. So last spring I saw 6 birds there at the end of August, which is actually the highest number of birds I've seen in one day in Canterbury, in Waitaha. So it is a critical stronghold for the species within the region. And yeah, it's the part of the lake there where I think we've got the capability for large scale wetland creation. Tying it in with Karara, with the cycle trail, and with a geopark or the southwestern corner of Whakarapo being developed as well, we could have a real beautiful crescent for ecotourism as well as conservation. We also have to remember that Te Waihora is the 2nd largest commercial tuna fishery in New Zealand, and this large scale wetland creation could really work for enhancing our juvenile eel habitat within that economic space.
The second one was similar to Dion's role of DOC, but I'll change my question to, have you done a presentation to DOC, any of their boards?
No, I haven't done a presentation to DOC, but in my previous role with DOC, I led the negotiations with what was then Mercury Energy. I think it's been taken over by someone else, and today someone else has actually taken it over, but for a Northland wind farm where there was a concern that the turbines were in the flight path of the bitterns, and we negotiated a substantial agreement around producing bittern habitat and monitoring any potential adverse effects. And DOC at that stage were providing the science input to the negotiations that I was leading. And what I could see from there was the knowledge is there, I think, Councillor Pauling, to be able, with some confidence, to be able to do this mahi and be successful in that space.
Yeah, so Doc did do some really detailed satellite and radio tracking of kautuku or bittern in Waitaha about 5 to 6 years ago. But the department's research priorities now lay in the Upper North Island, because as Ken alluded to, that's where there's a funding base. And so they're satellite tracking birds at the moment, mainly around the Kaipara, looking at flight paths in relation to wind farm proposals. But there's also another DOC scientist, Harry Cayley, who's focused on working with kautuku or bittern. And his main research priority at the moment now is to locate chicks and bittern nests using vocalizations, because we think the real bottleneck now for the species is that we've got to find how many breeding females there are, where the chicks are, because it looks like the population may be male dominated.
And last question, have you presented or given any information to the Papatupu Runa?
No, not on this proposal, no. No, we haven't. We are doing a public presentation next Monday to the Waihora Ellesmere Trust AGM, and then we'll take it from there, Craig.
Thank you. One question from Councillor Duche, who's online. Paul, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. I'm recalling reading fairly recently about reduction in the population of cormorants, and the studies around that has been that because of global warming, the fish that they normally feed on are swimming deeper in the cooler waters. As such, the cormorants are having a harder time fishing because of the additional depth dive to. Could there be a possible correlation here?
The cormorant I think you're referring to is a spotted shag, which is a marine species, which has alarmingly seen a 90% decline in the last 30 years around Banks Peninsula, where the global stronghold is for the species, and all that science has been documented by Christchurch City Council ornithologist Andrew Crossland, who's got very detailed information. So that's more in the marine space rather than the freshwater space. Bittern are primarily a freshwater species, but yeah, certainly studying shag or cormorant populations is important because it does give us an indication of the freshwater productivity.
I think also, Peter, that is a really good question, understanding the ecosystem as a whole. And we all know that tuna migrate offshore to breed. They go to the warmer parts of the Pacific, and there's likely to be ecosystem changes as climate change effects come to the fore. We don't know the implications of that yet. I'd still be pretty confident that what we're proposing here will be successful, but there can't be any guarantees.
As your arrange will be referred to our chief executive, I'd like to receive two motions. I have someone to that's falling. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, can I speak to it?
Yep. Thanks.
Hey, thank you again for your work, and the reason for my questions was I know there is a bit of work going on. There is some work going on around the Green Park area with the Department of Conservation and Selwyn District Council and of course. So just that was good to know in terms of some work in terms of wetland restoration there. So that ties in nicely. But I was going to suggest too that we do have our forum with the Papatipi Runanga Te Rōpituia, which might be a good opportunity to look at this being brought to them. But also the Te Waikato co-governance group, which I think includes DOC as well, which I think would be a useful space to this to go to. So hopefully, if staff have a look at this, and Stephanie replied, maybe some of those things could be thought about to just try to link this in. So yeah, definitely thank you for bringing this to us, and ask our councillors to support this going forward.
Sure. Thank you. Any more discussion on this question? I ask, in favour, say aye. Aye. Okay. Thank you. Now we will move on to item 5 as extraordinary and unusual business. Oh, sorry, jump that down a bit. 4.2, deputations and petitions. There have been no requests for deputations and petitions. We move on to item 5. Extraordinary and unusual business. And here, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, we'll move on to item 7. Minutes of the previous meeting are on page 8 to 11 of your agenda. Are there any matters of accuracy relating to the minutes of the 14th of August 2024? We did not move that move these minutes to the regular delivery committee held on the 14th of August. Do we have someone to move that? Thanks, Councillor Mackay. Seconder. Councillor Hitch. Now we move on to all those in favour say aye. That's carried. Sorry. Speaking nerves. Fine. Sorry. I apologize for that. Now move on to 8.1. And I'll ask Catherine to already at the table.
Thank you. So just a reminder that this is bringing the resolution from the previous meeting. In this case, everybody being but in future it will bring incomplete resolutions from our meetings as well. So it's a very short paper. We'll just take that as read this morning. This is any.
Is there any questions from the floor? I'd like to put the motion. So would you have someone to move this motion? We accept the regional delivery committee resolutions. Councillor Edge, you seconder. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Okay, now go on to 8.2, sustainable consent delivery plan progress for the council. And I would ask Stephen Hall, Director of Operations and Aurora Grant Consent Managing Manager, to address this report.
Kia ora, councillors. Through the chair, this here is your update on our sustainable consents delivery plan. A really high priority piece of work for this organisation that the organisation and the council have been working on over the last couple of years. You know that we have applied a range of levers to improve this part of our business, noting that Canterbury is the largest region in New Zealand with the largest number of resource consents and the largest number of consents coming in the door for decisions. We've applied our Te Hapai Ora methodology to improving this area of business, so that there is the way we go about improving our systems and our processes to make them more effective and efficient. And I'm pleased to say we are making good progress in this area. You'll all note that the most important thing to get on to having an efficient and effective consenting system is you have to actually clear the legacy consents that you have before you can start processing other consents in a really timely and efficient way. And the timelines and targets that we set ourselves about 18 months ago around those things are, again, I'm pleased to say, on track, and Aurora will talk you through that. But she'll also talk about what the next steps are beyond that. So that's the purpose and the context for this presentation. I'll hand over to Aurora to take you through the slides.
Thanks, Stephen. Kia ora, everyone. So just a quick recap. Our RMA consent processing is one of our core services, and it does sit within the Environmental Regulation and Protection core service. We have over 26,000 active consents across Canterbury, and those are ones that have already been processed. And at any one time, the consents team is processing anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 applications. So through this presentation, I'll talk about the legacy applications, but I'll also talk about our overall workload and how we're tracking with those things. So taking you back to the beginning of the Sustainable Consent Delivery Plan, it was in July, August last year that we kicked off really intensive work on dealing with our legacy consents. Our legacy consents went back to 2002 was our oldest application, with many hundreds ranging from there right through to August last year. We put together a really comprehensive plan that not only looked at, do we have our resourcing right, it also looked at the efficiencies that we needed to build the organisation. The consents process doesn't just belong to the consents team alone. It sits right across as most parts of the organisation throughout the process. And we've worked really hard across the business to pick up and make efficiencies throughout the process, and that is really paying off. And the milestones that the team and the teams have been hitting over the past year. So I'm really proud to show you the results today, because it is a return on the investment of that this council made into the resourcing. So I will just take you through those as well. This will be familiar. This was the milestones that we've been working to across the last year. I'm really proud to say that we have hit all of these targets ahead of time. And we are now sitting at 69% of legacy consents have been cleared. But in that time, we've also grown the team significantly and improved our processes across the organisation. And we are well on track to address 100% of our backlog by December. I just want to point out and remind everyone what addressed means. So addressed is that every backlog application that was lodged prior to August last year has a clear pathway to being resolved. That's because we've got some big applications that are sitting with Environment Court, as an example, where the timeframes are out of our hands or they're working through a notified process. So this slide specifically looks at our legacy applications. So that's our backlog applications. This doesn't capture the total workload that's in the consents section at the moment. You can see the graph on the left that tracks from September 2003 through to now. And that shows the reduction of the work over time in terms of our backlog consents. Now, the different colours here are also quite important to show how we've improved things moving through the process as well. So you can see back in September last year, the purple colour at the top of the graph, that was actually applications that hadn't even been picked up by a planner yet because we didn't have the capacity in the team. And now that purple was non-existent over the last couple of months, actually back to March. So we have been able to pick up and move our legacy applications right through the process from March. And the light blue, that's the time an application is sitting waiting on hold for further information to come back in from applicants. And we've also been working really hard on reducing that because our backlog is also the communities and the consultants backlog as well. So it has been really a two-way process in making sure that our consultants know really clearly what they need to do to get the information back into us to get things progressing through. The graph on your right of your slide here just shows the reduction over time of our legacy consents. The time the starter was pulled was August, so that is a month behind there. And just looking at our overall progress, so this, now I'm talking about our entire consenting load because it's really important that we are not only addressing our backlog, but we are not enabling another backlog to build with our new work coming in. So the team's been balancing both moving our legacy applications while keeping on top of new work coming in. There is some instances where we are not able to fix new work until a legacy consent is dealt with, and that's where there might be a queue for water resources, as an example. But overall, we have brought the volume of overall applications in progress down from, it was sitting around 1,500, it is now sitting around 1,000 at any one time. And we are tracking really well with our timeframes. The service measure number 2 in our long-term plan is our statutory timeframe compliance for consents. Our target for this year is 50%, and that is our overall target. So that's legacy consents and our new consents coming in. The figure up there takes into account both of those two blocks of applications. Our target's 50%. We are tracking at 54%, and that's continuing to climb, which is really great news. And our third service measure is a new measure introduced to make sure that we are not building a backlog for this LTP. And that looks at making sure that we are keeping our ratio of applications going out the door to those coming in above 1, and we're tracking really well on that average as well. I'm also pleased to say that we are tracking within budget for the last 2 months of the new financial year, which is fantastic. The finance policy does require that consents operates between 60% cost recovery and 80% cost recovery. So the budget is tracking within those bands at the moment. If we recover higher, then I expect that the draw on general rates for the consenting budget will be reduced. Probably don't need to take you through that that consents backlog does have a huge impact on our community. Also has impacts on partnership and applicants themselves, as they have the uncertainty around timeframes and the overall outcome of their individual application. Really pleased to say that we are seeing a big change in applicants through both the backlog consents being resolved, but new applications coming in. We've also had a really large improvement in the quality of applications coming in the door, and consultants have been working really hard with us to make sure that they get us what we need up front to be able to process those applications well. There's always the risk and consents around changing legislation. We obviously need to pick up and deal with any changes to legislation. We need to adapt to court cases as it moves into law, and we need to apply it to consents. And there is a number of applications in the backlog that are affected by the 107 situation. Okay, yeah. And we'll be working through those and bring it into December over the next few months. I did want to just draw to your attention the workload again, and I know you've seen this before, that is coming over the next few years in Canterbury. So the different colours on this graph relate to different activities. The red are discharge permits, and that is not broken into any specific types of discharges there. That's all discharges. Blue is water takes and uses, and green is land use. And a small amount of coastal in there with the light green, I believe. No, sorry, I've got that wrong. It's the darker blue. I've got one more slide, so maybe we'll do that and then. With that future workload in mind, we're obviously turning our mind to how do we make sure that our consenting process is really sustainable throughout the influx of renewals. And so what we're doing is as part of dealing with the consents backlog, we've also made sure that the team's adequately resourced and is structured appropriately to deal with the incoming new work as well. And that's working really well in terms of front loading our pre-application advice and getting ahead of proposals before they come in, so we can set expectations with applicants up front. We're also looking at how can we be more effective with approaching our common catchment expiry consents. So we have catchments across Canterbury, and most catchments are like this, where we have a bunch of the same types of applications expiring around the same time, and they're generally within a year of each other. So most catchments do have that. So we've looked at how can we have our science ready to go and our consent advice ready to go for the applicants before they come in the door, so that consistencies with those applications when they do hit the RM process with my team. Internally, the work does continue with looking at efficiencies across the consenting system and making sure that our fees and charges, as an example, are kept up with our new way of working. So we will be checking and testing that as we get more efficient in the process, that our fees and charges do reflect that over time, as an example of one efficiency that we're making internally.
Very much for that, Aurora. I mean, congratulated for the you've achieved in the last 12 months. I think it's been on the team. Our first question is from Councillor Karakia, who's online. Can you hear us, Knock?
Kia ora, Chairman Ward. Yes, I can. Hey, Aurora, thank you for that update, and just to tautoko support what the chair said, you know, at least we're actually starting to see some results, you know, in what you were doing, and particularly around the legacy consents. My question actually is, if you go to page 19, 44, engagement, significance and Māori participation. In this, I mean, if I'm understanding what this is saying, we have started to, the second sentence, we have started to receive an increase in positive feedback from applicants. Does that mean that the applicants are positively feeding back as to the engagement with Papatipa Runanga, or their representatives who are responsible for inputting into consents?
For you, Mr. Chair, the second point there, so that that speaks to the applicant's overall experience with the consenting process rather than specific to Papatipa Runanga involvement.
Okay, let's get to specifics about Papatipa Runanga involvement then, because initially last year in particular, there was at Roputuia, there was a concern, you know, around this kind of new way of addressing the consent backlog, and then how that would affect, you know, the Papatipa Runanga and the work that they do around the consents as well. So what kind of measurement have you got there? I mean, how is that working? Is there, I mean, is it actually the Papatipa Runanga that are, is there any backlog? Is there any negativity? Yeah, what is the consensus? Because what I hear out there is that there's still a little bit of frustration, but I think with these reports, we need to be a bit more specific about, you know, how Papatipa Runanga or their representatives around the environmental entities are actually working in with us.
For you, Mr. Chair. Dealing with backlog has not been easy on many parts of the consent process in terms of capacity, and our Papatipa Runanga through the entities that they have set up to input into the consent processing. It has been, there has been issues with capacity right across the board. What we have done over the course of the Sustainable Consents Delivery Plan is work with our Papatipa Runanga and the environmental entities that provide us the advice to also look at ways that they can streamline their processes in order to get us the information that we need to process applications within the statutory timeframes of the RMA. There is a lot of work to do in that space, and that is ongoing.
Just if I add a little bit more through the chair, kia ora, Councillor Karakia. I mean, this here, I guess, is the piece where there's been a lot of effort from both sides that have been put in. But what we are doing, and we've talked about this before in council, is we are, as Aurora has briefly touched on, lining up our statutory responsibilities as the decision maker around this and the aspirations of Runanga. I think in the last 18 months or so, that there is certainly better than it was.
Yeah, kia ora, Stephen. Yes, and I agree with that. But I think that what I'm asking now then is that if we could have actually more sort of vision, or rather more optics actually as to how that's going in the reports like this one.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
No, carrying on through the chair, same point. Yeah. Carrying on from Councillor Korako, and then we've raised this before, and I've raised this and asked a couple of questions through the CEO. I mean, fair enough, Stephen, you just said aspirations, right? But I mean, awesome work, and tracking ahead of schedule, and well done to the team. But I raised that question, and I said, what about resources? Because the resources, 39 staff coming in. So increasing the capacity here, but not increasing the capacity at the prees. So I mean, the question is, you're talking about, it sounds like there's nothing in this paper that tells me the work's been done with the prees. So I'm disappointed about that. Also disappointed that maybe the funding hasn't gone across as well. Talking about capacity. So we're increasing our capacity here. It's not their fault. So how's that been shown and with the prees that actually they can cope with this? Because I'm scared about, because even in September coming up now, the increase again of consent applications, not only the previous, new ones coming in as well, that things will slip through the cracks, right? And our values, mana whenua values, a lot of effort's gone into the RPS and other areas. Hopefully, things haven't slipped through the crack, and then therefore issues, I'm not sure what they are, but I'm sure things have, because we just heard from Aurora that trying to streamline it, so it means getting it through ASAP without probably mana whenua eyes going over them. So, carrying on from Councillor Korako, how is that going to be addressed? And I feel like, even though that the questions in those emails I asked previously, I just do not see reflected. So, I mean, moving forward, or even, in the next couple of weeks, just I'd like to see how those are going to be addressed, and what, if anything, has slipped through the crack. What has slipped through the crack?
But through the chair, happy to share some of the work that the team has been doing, so that you've got more visibility of that. Because as I noted, there has been a lot of work, and Aurora could comment more on that. But there is more work and part of that is around, to me, the efficiency and streamlining is how do we, as the resource manager, work with Runanga so that everybody is able to feel comfortable that they've had the input that is required, and it's probably not one size fits all for every single consent. That's the sort of feedback that we're getting. It's not, obviously some of them are really straightforward and really simple. Some of them are much more complicated. So that's probably some of the work that.
Through the chair once more, as I said, and then Councillor Korako confirmed it. We can't see that in this paper. So if we don't know, we know.
Yeah, mine's continuing on that. So I'm going to continue on that and then take a slight tangent. But so my big concern that I have is that there's a lot of mouths being fed in this resource consent process. There's our mouth, there's Runanga mouth, there's consultant's mouth, there's other consultant mouth, there's expert advice mouths. How many consents did you say? 26,000.
That's the number that we have got, that we've already made decisions on. But yeah, we've got a couple of thousand that come in the door each year.
So I'm really concerned. So how do we benchmark against other councils in New Zealand around the amount of consents that we have? My big thing here, the reason I'm asking that question is that I don't want to leave a legacy. I've got 12 months left in this building. I don't want to leave a legacy for the next council to have to pick up so many consents and have these same conversations again. So the benchmark that we have around the amount of consents that we have, is that in line with other councils around New Zealand? And is there a way that we can potentially, from my strategy hat here, look at our whole consenting process in the next little while so that we actually streamline some of the, you're talking about efficiencies and streamlines, but I'm not hearing any conversation around actually doing less consents, focusing more on risk, and making the process a lot easier so that both our Māori partners don't have to worry about being up-resourced because they don't have the time. But actually thinking about the outcomes, like if we had less consents, would we still have the same environmental outcomes that we're having now? Would it be better? So the question is, how do we really focus on this next step? Like we're talking about sustainable consents in the backlog, but moving forward, I'm very, very concerned about this. So are we able to look at that somehow, and how do we?
But through Through the chair, I mean, that's a really big question. Yeah, and it's actually very strategic. You're talking about the business and the art of how do you be a smart resource management agency and regulator. And that's much beyond just our consenting function, which remember is one of the actions, it's one of the interventions that we choose to use to achieve good resource management outcomes for the region. Which of those interventions you use, noting that planning is another one. Obviously, plans influence significantly what your consenting system and framework looks like, and your compliance is another one, and then a whole bunch of your other, hopefully complementary non-regulatory measures are other things. How you do that in a smart way, that there is beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, and is quite a strategic conversation. Yeah.
But I believe that it actually is part of the scope of this conversation. You see the graph that you put up there, and we're going to have this massive rise of consents. I don't believe that that's sustainable. This is called a sustainable consent. It's not sustainable both from a consenting point of view and a compliance point of view. So how do we take it from what we're doing now? I'm asking for advice. How do we take it from what we've got now so that this table can start having that conversation in a strategic way so that we're addressing that part of it? So we're addressing the volume part, not just putting a Band-Aid and pushing more resource to something that's perpetually falling out of control.
I think there's two parts to the answer to that question. The first is about the planning framework at the front end of this process. The second part is we live with what we've got right now, and that there is actually about being much smarter in terms of the way that we process consents. So that there is, as an example, using things like it could be AI for really simple consent applications that come in. That builds on the streamlined process that Aurora was referring to around the simple applications that we've got coming in the door at the moment, which are being looked at by people, but there are other ways to do that in a smarter way. So, and that actually goes on to our clients as well, because we'll be talking about that next. And clients, whilst it's not just about resource consents, a significant portion of it is about resource consents. So how do you ensure that you have a compliance and a consenting framework that enables you to get across all of that significant sort of avalanche that we've got and the numbers that we've got massive scale, and make sure that you know whether or not you're achieving the outcomes, because you're doing this for outcomes. And how do you do that in a way that achieves for most of these things, we're talking about resources and catchments. So how do you ensure that you are achieving an integrated catchment approach, which is holistic to the values that are in that particular catchment? And that's the strategic piece.
I endorse some of quite a few of your concerns there, and I think this is something we need to flag and cut back about it a bit. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you. We have an ERP leader that can know the book. Yeah. So that will be coming to discussion as well as the blueprint. It's the blueprint with that S&P committee. Yeah, look, like the others have said, thanks Aurora for the work that you've led. I know it's probably been quite painful at times, but yeah, look, great work to reduce the legacy numbers and to see the improvement in efficiency. Progress there, albeit we've still got a little way to go with our time compliance. I just have a couple of questions, and you sort of alluded to it around continuing improvement consents delivery, but what's the quantum of that opportunity here? I mean, I hope this is quite a significant opportunity still. And the second one is just with regards to our earlier conversations, we had divided up, and you staff had divided up and talked to councillors around pre and post 2020 consents, and it would be just quite interesting to see. And that was because of the difficulties of trying to get some of those over the line, of course, just to see where those are still falling now. So sorry, two questions there.
So through you, Chair, on your first question around what's the scope of opportunity internally to our efficiency. We've done all of the easy stuff. And now I think the next steps will be looking at exactly what Stephen alluded to earlier around the use of smart technology to help us reduce our consenting burden. While we can't change the numbers of consents until the overarching framework changes, there is opportunity to be a lot smarter and innovative on how we are helping applicants out there to prepare for the consenting process, and also in our processing as well. So that is certainly on the next steps what we look at. And on your second question, I'll just get you to repeat it because I'm not very clear exactly what you're.
Earlier briefings and information that came to council was around the issue of the pre-2020 consents that were sitting in the system and the legacy with versus the post-2020, and I'm presuming that was, my memory's right, around the NPS 2020 stuff. How does that framework look like now? Are we basically dealt with the post-2020s and then those much older ones?
Follow now. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we have made an across the board reduction in the numbers of legacy consents. You are correct in recalling that there was a large lump that was sitting in backlog around 2020, and that was a couple of factors. That was the MPSFM landing, where we needed to go back to applicants for further information, but it was also COVID related as well in terms of resourcing and having things move through. And those have reduced significantly as well across the board. I don't have the latest breakdown on numbers for that, so I'm not going to provide them here, but I can come back. But with the indications from central government as well, it has meant that our overall weighting on our planning framework has made things been able to move applications through as well.
Southworth.
Thanks. And yeah, it's really good to see the progress that's been made. So thank you for that. That would be a lot of hard work in there. I'm just wondering, in terms of the targets, it actually looks like you're doing better than the target so far. And that also then comes with a budget saving, which at the moment, when we put the consents, where we're having to make refunds back because we're not turning around consents fast enough, the difference is paid by general rates. So what happens to the general rate component? If there's a saving, that's presumably the general rate saving. So where does that go? Does it go into reserve, or how does that work?
I believe that would be an overall decision when we come to end of year finances in terms of tracking for council. But that said, with our finance policy, because we've got a range of how much we need to cost recover, I don't foresee us going over the 80% cost recovery this year. That would be a long stretch. But if that was to occur, then there would be a decision to be made in terms of what that money. But we would also need to check that our fees and charges are correct, because where consensus a user pays non-profit essentially service.
Through the chair, likely to reduce the amount of general rate that comes into this area, which might mean that there's more general rate, you know, either for other areas of the business, if the council decided that, or sitting in the general rate reserve.
Yeah, but it is tagged to general rate. You can't somewhere else that's not general rated.
Councillor East.
Thanks for a great presentation. Generally, a picture tells 1,000 words, and I'd encourage more of a pictorial display of where we're going. Noting sort of today's paper when you're getting a haranguing for 26% of consents being conducted on a statutory timeline, Look, my experience over a number of years with consenting issues is there's always two sides to a story. And invariably, I've found with a number of consents, when I was with the city council, you get people complaining about how long it's taking. And the request for information is going back to a consultant or someone else involved with the consent, and the applicant doesn't actually know what's going on. It's wherever the request for information is going that's holding up the process. So you guys are pretty much on a hiding to nowhere. The press will pick on the easiest way to have a go. And I'm absolutely confident in the steps that you're taking now to reduce our time spans and consents processed. Just a question around the legacy consents. What's the impact of legal decisions on the number of consents that might be sitting there, still going to wait a while?
I believe there's around, and we deal with changing legislation in the consent space all the time. And we do from time to time have big decisions that do fundamentally change how we need to look at things. What it generally means is the applicant needs to look at what they've proposed and maybe make some alterations to what they're proposing on the ground to make sure that it fits within both our regional framework, but also what the court's indicated. And sometimes those changes or alterations that they need to make are quite minor, and sometimes they can be quite significant. And sometimes applicants choose not to proceed with their applications. In terms of legacy consents that we have in the pipeline at the moment, that we've had to go back and say, you might need to look at this law change because at the moment your application doesn't fit with the requirements. That would be around the 80 to 100 number. And of that, I don't foresee a significant number of those in that sort of very hard to progress basket. They would be probably under 20. So we have worked really hard to make keep those numbers down and proactively work with the applicants to shape their applications. That said, our numbers of withdrawn applications have increased slightly compared to what we normally do, and that is a product of people going, actually, I'm going to go and have another think about my idea here.
Bring that to us. Just a couple of coastal permit questions. With the extension to aquaculture that was brought in by government, how will that affect some of those consents from a consenting point of view? Because clearly we probably will be monitoring them still or obtaining data to that effect. Is that a positive, I guess, is with regards to consenting, or I guess that's the question, because we don't talk about it and what the effects might be or other things. That was one question. I've got another one after that. But
for you, Chair, the number of coastal permits that are subject to the aquaculture extension in Canterbury are quite small. So compared with our overall workload, the impact on the consenting function is quite minor. There is some administrative work that we need to do with those affected consents. And I have had some anecdotal indications that some of those consent holders may wish to undertake some variations now that they've got a longer term duration. So we may see some of those come in. But again, it's quite minor in the scheme of our overall application volume. In terms of compliance, I won't comment on that. That will be a matter for Jen to cover off shortly.
My other question is with regards to water permits taking use. Just, I guess, the change of use situation, if we do look at use for existing take consents, the consent holders for fully allocated areas. What effect will, I guess, looking at the new use have on the consenting? Because that will be essentially revisiting those consents and doing conditions on them. Will that look like extra work or less work?
Through your chair. Anytime a planning framework is made clearer, it generally means less work for the consents team. It's really too early to say until we start picking up some of those renewals that are due to come in across the region. But certainly when the planning framework is made clear, it does mean that there's often less backwards and forwards with applicants to work out what their proposal means against the framework. But in essence, it's too early to say, and probably a question that's best directed at the sort of planning scoping of that plan change.
So each.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your report. I just have a few questions really about the charts. That one, I think it's page 6, the one with the bar diagrams of the blues. That one. Just confirming, you got some bullet points there with different types of applications. Are you confirming that none of the 1,200 applications, in terms of the legacy application, are requiring a hearing? Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, no, that's not correct. So this doesn't quite show clearly the application at hearing, and I believe that might have been lumped in with the objection or appeal in process, which is not correct. So that's a bug in our reporting that's coming through. But no, there's approximately 50 at hearing at the moment from legacy consents that are working their way through the process. But apologies, that could have been clearer in those bars.
Okay, thanks. The other question there, the light blue says applications on hold. Could you explain the reasons that those applications are likely to be on hold?
Yeah, absolutely. Through your chair. So that's using the hold mechanisms that the RMA provides us. So there's a number of reasons that an application might be on hold. I think there's about 4 to 5 different avenues an application can be placed on hold. And that's both our tool and the applicant's tool, depending on the circumstances. So times we would use it is if we require more information to determine the effects of a proposal. So that's commonly known as a request for further information. And there's various ways we can do that through the Act, depending on the circumstances. Another reason we might do it is if we identify through the auditing that the course of their activity will actually require other authorisations. So that would be a reason it went on hold as well. And a third reason we might use it is where we're waiting for another party's written approval to say use a section of land or something where they need to provide their approval before we're legally able to progress things. Otherwise, things can go on hold from the applicant side of things where they say need more time to get further evidence or something like that.
And that process is usually within the time frame. That's, we're within time rather than becoming a burden. The other question I've got, the application is waiting for Section 88. Does that, I just wondering what percentage in that would be causing issues? Is it controlled, discretionary, non-compliant? What's the biggest laying mechanism of the structure of the application?
Through you, Chair. It's not quite a delay. It used to be because we didn't have enough people to pick up applications. Now we don't have that same delay, but that's we've got 10 working days under the Act to determine whether an application's complete or not. And what complete as is set out in the Act as well. So that's simply showing that we, since March, have been meeting all of those statutory timeframes in the Act for that part of the process.
Final question there. The next graph, the two slides. That one. The red orange, but the discharge permits. Are you able to give us a bit of an idea within those discharge permits? What's the proportion of the key discharge issues? Air, land, or water? Are you able to roughly say? Could be.
Through you, Chair, yeah, most of the red that you see on the graph there will be section 15 1Bs, which are discharged to land where it may enter water. So that's the majority of the applications that we have subsequently granted. And there'll be a very small portion that are to air and some that fall into the discharge to water camp, but the vast majority of those numbers up that you see up there, probably 90% are discharged to land where it may enter water.
Kia ora. I just want to go back to Councillor Karakia and Councillor Cranwell's questions, sort of statements. I don't quite have the same contact with Papatipu Runanga as you would expect, given our ETN councillors with Tahu constituencies. But my understanding is for some of the Runanga entities, and I will use Mahanui Kuratai as an example, given they are within the Christchurch Central area, and mana whenua here are Naituapu, so I have some contact through that. Would it be fair to say, well, can you give me a comment actually on my understanding that they have actually taken up additional resourcing to support the work that gets forwarded to them through full consenting requirements by Environment Canterbury? Is that? Can you comment on that, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I won't comment on numbers of FTAs. I don't have that to hand, and it's not my part of things, but I can say that we have seen significant improvements in the time frame turnaround from MKT in terms of working with us through the sustainable consents plans that they have their return times back to us. They've halved how long it's taking to get advice back, which has been a really fantastic piece of work done there.
Yeah, thank you.
And Aurora and Stephen, I'd like to thank you for your patience today. Answering the questions. And I think, I guess there's 4 key words going through, and that's sustainability, meeting our targets, using some innovation, and recognising the opportunities going forward. So thank you for your time today. I'll now ask you to leave the table. So I'd like to put the motion up. That's the direction of the committee receives update on progress being made. Central delivery plan and to endorses the next steps. Of sustainable delivery plan, including correct approach to applications for consent renewal, finding greater efficiencies between consents and compliance functions. Do I have a mover? Thanks, Councillor Swiggs. But second, Councillor East. Is there any discussion? Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just a couple of comments related to the report. Page 18, item 36. It seems clear to me that the decision that Council made in October last year to invest in additional staff to help clear the legacy issues and the backlog of consents needing processing has been a great success. The sustainable consents delivery plan has improved efficiency and reduced penalty costs for late processing. And then item 38 on page 19, the report clearly identifies too that the situation was causing stress to staff and applicants' well-being, and obviously that's been a huge relief for both the applicants and staff in terms of overcoming some of those issues through that delivery plan process. Item 41, again, we are expecting in September, which is now, another influx of consent applications for renewals and other things that are coming in. And my understanding that over the next 10-year period, that was going to continue to increase. So the pressure is on. We have the staff in place and it's looking pretty good. Just going back to page 16, items 19 and 20. I was a bit like Councillor Whakatau and Councillor Cranmore, a bit concerned that this extra push to deliver may have resulted in some missteps in processing. But I'm pleased that in item 20 is to see that the service measure target, which involves sampling audit, a sampling audit process for consent applications, is indicating that we are fully compliant with RMA requirements. And although the timeframes have been an issue, the quality of the processing work is reported has been very, very good. It's my final comment. I was going to ask you a question, but right at the bottom of page 19, item 48, next steps, suggests that the consent team's going to have a more of a proactive catchment-based approach to anticipated renewals. Catchment-based means different things to different people, but I suppose, and that sounds good to me. I suppose, can't really ask the question, but I'm assuming that this might mean that the cumulative effects, by taking a catchment approach, the cumulative effects on, say, multiple consent holders within a catchment could now be considered in a more efficient and holistic spatial context, which I guess that's the general gist of the discussion we had before, and that there's a more efficient way of dealing with things on a spatial context. But other than that, thank you very much for the report, and I think things are looking good. Hopefully the changes to litigation through the legislative process through the government is not going to further disrupt the progress we're making.
Councillor Smith.
No, I'll finish it.
And Councillor Coyne.
Look, yeah, thanks. I know staff have presented and everybody's appreciated the work done, but I just want to note that our CE was instrumental in taking this on board as well. And thank you, Stephanie, for being brave and bringing this to us and getting rid of these legacies, getting this legacy issues sorted. I know there are certainly media talking about this looked quite similar to mid-2000s. So thank you very much for taking that on.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank you, Stephen, and the whole team. I especially want to thank Laura. I can actually looking a little lot taller and lighter today, if I may say so, compared to how we've seen you over the past year. So I genuinely want to acknowledge the work that you are all putting in and all of your staff. I also want to thank the press, because I think it's holding on a really sound community to have people questioning where, how, what. I do hope that without singling anyone out in the room, that they take note of some of the stuff that has been discussed within the presentation this morning, and acknowledge that it is a little more nuanced than just numbers. But I will quote the article. In fact, there's a number of very good paragraphs in it. One I will quote, though, is Lincoln University Associate Professor Hamish Rennie said, this is in talking in cost overruns, delays, etc., and the worsening state of rivers, lakes, groundwater, and other environments. said this would be a significant issue for moving through the consents because almost all of ECAN's catchments, many of which have very high ecological and other values, were degraded well and beyond they were 20 years ago. So again, while we are talking about consenting, we are talking about the process, we are talking about the people who are making their livelihoods out there. Let us not forget, this is about the environment anyway, which continues to degrade rapidly. And we have a job, a bigger job here to ensure that we put our foot out to hold it up and stop it. Kia ora, thank you.
So thank Aurora and your expertise in the field and your humour at times bringing to the table. It's such a gnarly one. Yeah, well done and for getting to this point. They often say that the last sprint to the deadline is the hardest. I hope that's not the case. However, I still have deep down gut feelings that this push can be at the detriment of the environment. And like Councillor Burrs was saying, and a lot of people at Forest and Bird, big fast track meeting last night, talking about issues in our environment that, you know, are sitting there waiting to be resolved. I just really hope that the push, the streamlining process here doesn't end up with some sort of outcomes at the end. The main thing is, you know, what's to come with Plan Change 8 we're talking about, and the change of use of water. That is still something that I can't sit with comfortably. And as I said, I voted against it. I still feel like something is missing in here that looks at the effects of uses and the likes. But look, your hard work is amazing, and I'm sure we'll get there somehow. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of thanks, and I'll echo the thanks. I didn't say it when I asked my questions, I just launched straight into it, but there's a whole team behind you as well, which we need to acknowledge and say thanks to those people as well. Because not just the head of the chicken that's running around, it's the leaves as well. So I don't know where I was going with that. It's funny, it's in a sense. And Stephanie and everybody, but and I'll also thank the press, which is something that I don't often do, because raising these issues is actually important, and putting the number on it like you've done is one element. But something that's been in the back of my mind is that what's the cost of protecting our environment? Everybody's going, we need to protect the environment. We need to make sure that we're making good decisions for the environment. How much does that cost? Are people willing to pay for that? And that's what I'm seeing in these processes. And I'm hearing that these consents are getting far more complex, far more, a lot more information needed, and a lot more people wanting input into it. And that costs. That's the reality of it. What's the cost of that? Well, that's the thing. What's the cost of not doing it? If we just basically passed all of these things through, what would happen? So then we'd have a different headline on the paper, I'm pretty sure of it. But I'm still really keen to, we've got these consent issues, and this came up when I first got elected into this council, and I saw these numbers, and I was like, holy cow, there's something here that really is not quite right, which is when we got this sustainable consenting thing coming through. But I'm sitting around the table right now saying, we've got 12 months before the next election. I don't want that same thing happening to the next council around the number of consents that are coming through and the way that we look at how we do that in our current systems. Can we do it better while maintaining the same environmental outputs and the same environmental protections that we as a council want to see in consented activities that we do in our region? So I'm really keen to work with you, whoever I can work with, to look at that. If there's a way forward that we can do that, personally, I'd love to see half the amount of consents maybe in this organisation going through this place, because that has a big impact on making sure that we can still do the activities that people want to do. But can we do that in a way that still makes those protections that people want? I'm up for that. So I'll leave it at that. But again, thanks for the work that's gone on this. It's an evolution, and see where it was.
Thanks, Councillor Swiggs. Councillor Karakia, are you there?
Yes, I am, Chair Ward. Actually, I was going to just tautoko what my Te Aotearoa colleague just said, with the exception of the head of the chicken. But anyway, one thing that I do want to say though, and it's actually was highlighted originally by Aurora's comment, and I support everything, all that positive work that's been done, and we're starting to see the fruits of that. This is more around a process thing, particularly around the papers and how they're presented. I actually think now that when you look at 44 again, there's a heading engagement, significance and Māori participation. I actually think that Māori shouldn't be lumbered in with all the rest of the engagement significance. I think we should actually have our own heading of Māori participation, so that there's no confusion then about how Māori have actually been included in these processes that these papers actually describe. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Noel. Okay, no more discussion of what these two motions are. All those in favour say aye. And against, say no. From that perspective. Be abstained. So, yeah, this motion is carried. We now move on to 8.3, which is compliance update. Stephen Hall, Director of Operation, and Jennifer Rockford, Manager of Supply to introduce the bill. Welcome.
Through the chair. So this here really is the rest of the chicken farm, probably. An extension of what we've just been talking about. So the first piece of this really is about our progress in our compliance piece of our business for last financial year and the first couple of months of this financial year. And then starting to talk about, really, just like you did a couple of years ago with consents, about our compliance activity and how we do that in an improved and smarter way into the future. And Jen, who is our acting compliance manager, has been leading a team that's been looking at what this might look like. And this is the first time that we've talked to you about that. So hand over to Jen and she'll take you through the presentation.
Thank you, Stephen, and through the chair. The purpose or the presentation today is set out in two sections. So the purpose is to first give you an overview and update and assurance on the current compliance work program, but the second part is looking forward to the future on improving our compliance service. And just regarding the context, that was really helpful conversation. Just you heard from Aurora on the complex legislative frameworks, all the discussion that you were just having around the table. All of this is then therefore reflected in compliance. And so in the text bit up there, we say that planning, consenting, and compliance are all integrated. And so what happens in that planning framework and then in the consents, and then we see them for many, many years. We also have work underway to ensure that the council's outcomes through the impact framework and the long-term plan are reflected in the work of compliance. Just a reminder that the last update that council received was back November, where you received the annual snapshots. And we will review those today as part of the first part of this presentation for the 23-24, the previous financial year.
This is just a reminder of the role of council in compliance monitoring and enforcement. I think we all know that what we do as a regional council is manage water, air, and land resources through the planning frameworks and through resource consents. And then we have statutory and non-statutory instruments. One of the main statutory instruments, of course, is compliance. And so the role of council in that is setting direction, and you've done that through the strategic direction, through our core service outcome development, and through the long-term plan. And you provide oversight on council's compliance enforcement. I think we have a role in doing that. And then decision-making delegations for staff for regulatory matters. And then the role of the chief executive and of staff is to develop the compliance work program and deliver on those to ensure that resource users are complying, and to that middle one is to manage water shortage directions. And then also we make determinations on if we take enforcement actions, things like an abatement notice, enforcement. So this slide here is giving us some visibility on the 23-24 financial year on the consent monitoring that was done. So we did 4,320 inspections, and that was of 3,470 resource consents. So some consents were monitored more than once during the year. In there, and that's more in the report, 40% of that monitoring was for water, 38% was discharge, 21 land use, and 1% was coastal. As you can see, the vast majority was compliant or an A grade, with a smaller some still in progress that were completing the reports. There were 50 significant non-compliances that were found. Of those, 34 were part of the high priority consent list. And for the significant non-compliances, there were the majority were for discharges, and a lesser amount for land use water permits and coastal permits. And then on the right-hand side for incident response, this is very consistent with what we see over previous years, that we see a lot of compliance and consent monitoring, possibly because people are a bit more aware about what they need to do. And then we see more in the B grade, where there's just a minor non-compliance, possibly due to a lack of awareness, but it does give us a really clear understanding about where we might need to do education to prevent such. So in this yellow bit, the 52% of our incidents, or actually overall 52% of our incidents, were for discharges to air. And I think about half of them were for smoke. So that was for burning, and odor and dust. So odor was about 40% and dust about 11%. So that's where we're standing on the stats for incident response. This slide gives us a bit of a comparison. As you can see, the number of resource consents monitored is a very insignificant change. Number of inspections conducted is, again, insignificant. There was a minor reduction in abatement notices, but abatement notices are signaling a directive action that needs to happen. And so we can do that also through compliance monitoring reports. So that's not, I wouldn't see that as a significant change. Infringement notices, it's very similar, and prosecution's the same. And so down in incident response, again, very consistent numbers of incidents that have been reported. Abatement notices is quite a significant drop. I did look into this a bit to see if there was any trend. Was there some sort of, was there something that was going on in 22-23 versus 23-24? And I did not find a specific. Sorry.
I'm not sorry, I'm
You got it?
just making sure the chair,
Okay.
sorry.
And for infringement notices, I would not say that significant prosecution is the same.
We taking questions at all, or we're carried right to the end?
I'm gonna wait till the end, so yeah.
Okay. And this is year to date. And so we've monitored 461 consents to date and just over the past weeks. And we've had 515 incidents. Again, this is consistent with what we've been seeing in previous years. Our current work program that we're progressing into this current financial year is very similar to what we did in the previous financial year, because we're currently transitioning to the new level or the new service measures. And so we're still focusing on resolving non-compliance and on the remaining high priority consents from the previous year and all the new high risk consents that have come in over the past financial year. And I'll talk in another slide about the transition to the new service measures when we get to that area. This next one, I think that we may have a section in these papers where we highlight an activity, a compliance activity, and give you a bit more detail around what's happening in this area. So in this one, we're focusing on farming land use consents. And we, through the Canterbury Land and Water Management Regional Plan, we had sub-regional chapters that required a significant change in how we were managing mainly nutrients across Canterbury. And so in order to do this change in compliance, we undertook consent to farm campaigns between 2017 and 2020. These were all staged and prioritized to ensure that we were targeting the necessary farmers that needed to undertake, get a land use consent to farm. So these campaigns, the first one was the sensitive lake areas. It was a very small number of farmers. I think it was about 23. The second campaign was farms with greater than 50 hectares of irrigation. That one was 1,000 farmers that we started with there. We ran that campaign and only had to issue a couple of abatement notices that didn't need to actually be followed up. So that was hugely successful in those farms through. And then we followed up the smaller, with smaller campaigns that followed the sub-regional plans. So the South Coastal Canterbury area, Hines, and then the phosphorus sediment risk area and the cultural landscape values management area, SELWAN. And so to date, we have about 1,200 individual land use consent to farm consents in place following all those consents, and that is most of the targeted farms that have applied, that need to apply, that should say, for farming land use consent, and the remainder are managed through irrigation scheme global consents. So compliance is part of environmental regulation and protection, the core service, and we have guidelines that guide how we do our work in compliance, and we also have an enforcement policy that is on our website and freely available. We now have new service measures. I should note, these need updating. The guidelines are from 2018, the enforcement policy is from 2019. And so part of our improvement work will be what's required, what needs to change in here. But the crux of it, in that we do an escalation of enforcement or our basic compliance tools, probably is still very relevant. So the new service measures in the long-term plan are moving away from just managing the volume of consents that we monitor. So, 1, 2, 3, and moving more towards improving the compliance status.
And so service measure 5 is percentage of resource users improving their compliance status in a set of targeted categories. And we'll see in the next steps that we would like to come back to you in November to talk about what those draft targeted categories could be. Service measure 6 is the percentage of instances of significant non-compliance where Environment Canterbury takes action, a target of 100% because we absolutely need to address any significant non-compliance and have an action in place. Service measures should stay 7, 8, and 9 covers reports of incidents that are assessed for risk of harmful effects and how they're assigned to staff, so kind of timeframes for that, and then our response to marine spills. Compliance cost recovery. So same as Aurora covered, compliance has the policy of 60 to 80% of cost recovery for users. However, and we also have support compliance policy that's 100% through general rates. So that's based on the revenue and financing policy where we have 2 separate areas of funding for compliance. So the 100% funded through general rates is for engagement, education, and enablement, and the cost recovery one is more for monitoring, the monitoring aspect. However, last year, our cost recovery was 25% recovered from users. And due to that, the budget for this financial year anticipates 30% cost recovery and then increasing every year. You're going to want to know the reasons for that. One of the main reasons is resolution of non-compliance is absolutely takes priority before we undertake further monitoring. Resolving non-compliance is generally not cost recoverable because you're innocent until proven guilty, and we cannot charge for any of the infringement notice, paperwork, or any prosecution type work. The other reason is in the past, consents were much simpler. So I've been at Environment Canterbury a long time. I recall when we were easily nailing 70%. But it was also when we were monitoring, we would go out and monitor the 1,200 dairies every year. And so you go out and you could probably cover 3 or 4 a day, come back and write your report, and we would monitor the simple water take consents. Things were simpler. You could go out and just check the conditions and monitor the consent. The consents that officers are receiving now takes a lot of time to prepare, takes a lot of time to understand, and takes a lot of time to ensure that the consent holder understands the expectations. And so we need to, and that's that bottom line there. When we're looking at the work of improving, we want to have a conversation with council about reviewing how we fund this part of our business. Because the current work that we have to do in compliance, we're going to need to adapt how we work and therefore how we fund. This is the exciting part. We're doing work of transforming our compliance service. So this is the work of the compliance improvement project team. And I just want to take a second to address that statement there to help resource users comply. So right now, if you generally ask, what is the purpose of compliance? You would say it's to monitor compliance of resource consents, and it's to respond to incidents, which is fair enough. However, all of that and all of our previous reporting puts all the onus on us to say whether you are compliant or not. So you it's assumed that you may or may not be okay unless we go out there and give you a stamp that you are okay. What this statement is saying is that we need to ensure that the people undertaking resource use, whether it be a resource consent or a permitted activity, have to ensure they're able to demonstrate their compliance. So it means that we also have to put the systems and processes in place in order for them to do that. But we have to be more of an audit of compliance, not the monitoring. Yes, you are compliant, because it is not our accountability. It is the consent holder. It is the resource user's accountability to demonstrate compliance. That is the premise of that purpose statement. You just talked about this with the consents briefing. We have over 26,000 consents. You can't see a gap in those dots across the plains. It is an overwhelming number. And those are the active consents. So for the compliance improvement project, we're looking at taking a place-based approach where we're wanting to understand from a customer's perspective, which is the consent holder or the resource user, and where they live, what do we need to do in order to ensure that they can demonstrate compliance? So the compliance improvement project is focused on the Whakakapi. There is huge interest in our communities by the media, by a lot of people about what's happening in the Whakakapi. So we bravely chose that spot to understand better about what do we need to do in our compliance service to ensure that the community can have confidence in the service, compliance service that we provide. So this right here, it gives you an idea of the boundaries. All that is the localities around the Whakakapi River. It's about a 10-kilometer area. It's not saying that we want to just do our compliance there. It's just, this is where we're focusing to better understand the work compliance. So in the Whakakapi, that is 1,609 resource consents. However, if we look at it from more of a customer focused perspective, so just remembering that all the reporting that you receive, the way that we currently manage compliance is consent by consent. However, if you ask the question of Aurora, is that how they come in? No, they come in bundles because people don't do their consent. They do activities. You know, they do something on their property that requires multiple consents. And so one of the reasons that Aurora said that consents go on hold is because they required a consent for another related activity. However, in compliance, we go out and we monitor them one by one. I mean, sometimes we'll go out on site and we'll catch the other ones, but we're reporting on a one-by-one basis and setting our targets based on that. So if you look at this view here, so we had 1,649 consents in the Whakakapi, but the number of consent holders is 751. But if you actually look at the properties, there's only 570. So we went from 1,649 consents to 570 properties, which is a customer. It could be a customer. It may be that some of these properties are even linked and there's less customers. But this means that if we're looking from a customer perspective, we need to start building our work based on this perspective, not on a one by one.
Sorry, can you just repeat those numbers again? So
yes. 1,649 consents in Whakakapi. The number of consent holders is 751. The number of properties with consents against them is 570. So there's probably a few more properties up there, but the number with consents. So we are focused on consents, not just resource users. Yeah.
Excuse me, Jennifer, we've come to the 2-hour phase in the meeting, so we just need to move someone to move the extension of time. Then we can have a second. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This slide here then also puts another perspective on it. We have consent holders, so those black lines there are irrigation scheme funds. So in the lower part is Barnfield Chertsey, in the upper part it's Central Plains. And so you can see that if we start looking at some of our consent holders, an account management approach is required. We do this to some degree, but actually when we've been doing the work in the compliance improvement project, we've been seeing that there's multiple people talking to the irrigation schemes with multiple ways of working. And so if we look at this, the one scheme that we're currently working with directly has 43 consents, but they have 282 members of the scheme. And so if we start working at a scheme level, supporting that account management approach through understanding of the water use, of the nutrient management, we have the ability to actually cover a wider breadth by investing in more of an account management rather than, again, one officer goes out and monitors the water, one officer goes out and manages the land use. This is another factor. So all of this is just information we are gathering. We have not landed on a new approach. We're just bringing you the information that we're starting to gather to help us understand how we can think about transforming our compliance service. So what you're seeing here is complexity of water units. These are only for water. And so the blue ones are bucket 1 consents. Bucket 1 means they are simple. They're getting rarer and rarer. They are 1 consent, 1 take, 1 meter. So they're super simple. Then the bucket 2, bucket 3, bucket 4s, they get, and bucket 5s get more and more and more complex. The majority of, for water anyway, the majority are in bucket 3 and bucket 4. What you see, the complexity level 5 are your irrigation schemes, your Central Plains, your Bar Hill Chertseys, your Manawa. It's the very large scale, highly complex resource consents. So all this slide is doing is giving you some visibility that we are starting to understand complexity. We're more advanced in water because we've been doing this one a while, but we can do similar with, farming land use. We have some basic information that we can start using in building our understanding around complexity. Compliance has to do their bit in order to ensure that we as a regional council are having an impact on achieving outcomes. And so through the impact framework and the priorities that you'll be setting, I'm guessing that one of them might be community drinking water supplies. And so we're starting to look at, well, what could our contribution be in the compliance service in delivering on improved outcomes? So these, what you're seeing here, the red and orange, are community drinking water supplies in the Whakakapi. And so the blue dot you can see is a on-site wastewater system that we could monitor and ensure they're compliant. Give us a bit more confidence around the risk that's being put on these systems to ensure that we're doing our bit in compliance to ensure that that's being protected. The pink squares are just other discharge permits. And so part of the conversation and what we could do in compliance in order to achieve outcomes can be using information like this to make a commitment to what we can monitor and ensure compliance. This is kind of where we're ultimately wanting to get to. A really clear understanding of risk. So there's a couple things here. We want to use this to inform the work that our officers need to do. We also want to use this to understand how well are we delivering, what is the performance of our compliance service. So we could pivot this information and give you an indication about, well, how well are we managing on-site wastewater systems? We could tell you, how many are unconsented or how many are compliant, non-compliant, and we can give you an indication of a risk of an activity. But this here is giving us an indication of per property. And speaking, and I should also say, this is all very indicative, so please don't take the red isn't red, and this is to give you an idea. We're trying to gather different bits of information in order to visualize risk. One really important or exciting aspect of this that you're having a conversation about actually tomorrow is how do we include the Runanga perspective in here? So Ata Whenua is really keen to work on, to experiment on compliance. We don't know how we're going to do it yet. We don't know if it will be that they actually want to undertake compliance monitoring, or do they want to help us understand the place better so that we can feed it into our understanding of risk. That conversation's happening tomorrow. We're going to visit them down south, take a road trip, Rebecca and I. And I'm just super excited. I don't know, I'm just open, open to hear and see what we can do. That's what this whole compliance improvement project is about, is experimenting on live work. We have live work, we have this place, and we want to understand how to transform our compliance service. So next steps, we will continue to focus on a specific location, so on the Karakia, and we're trialing different risk-based approaches. We're just trying to understand what is the information that we continue to gather to really mature our understanding of risk. We will bring back to you in November some categories for consideration for the targeted categories for improving compliance status as per Service Measure 5. And we'll also bring back to you some future metrics. So I know the service measures, the commitment to our community and how we will deliver, but you need better measures. I need better measures. And so you need better measures of compliance. And I hope you can see we're starting to get some of that. So we'll commit to bringing you some future metrics that we can start to talk about. I'm finished.
Thanks very much for your thorough presentation. Time is ticking. Can we, definitely open questions, but can we keep them short and sharp and precise? Okay, Councillor Greenwood.
Order, Jennifer. Thank you for your detailed presentation, and I especially loved your quarter about Ata Whenua and going down on a road trip tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to how that goes. You on slide 14, you kind of those numbers. You go through the presentation, and you look at numbers and things, and then you just did it yourself. I was hoping just to dive into a little bit of detail there, just on it wasn't because of lack of staff or actually compliance going out and and monitoring wasn't that issue. Actually, just there was nothing to report, I suppose. It's the difference between 2022 and 2024.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think one of the measures that we, through the chair, apologies, one of the measures that a different way of reporting. When I look at this, I look at things that are directive. And so we can use compliance monitoring reports that help the consent holders understand what they need to do in order to be compliant. We can also use abatement notices, but they're very similar. And so it may just be that, a decision to use based on the experience on site on the day. Is an abatement notice actually required, or could we just do it through a compliance monitoring report? We did not see that this was due to staff.
Oh, okay.
No, it was, I couldn't find anything, and it's not that I dug too deeply, but no, that was not.
Second question is in regard to point 3. You talk about work is underway for an integrated planning framework working in partnership with public people. I think that's what tomorrow is part of, or
Yes, tomorrow is starting on how can we do this differently in partnership. So it's opening up the conversation in a specific place. But once we start that discussion, then we'll have to go more broadly across the region and ask other Runanga kind of input would they like to have. That, what was it, 53?
yes.
So I see that there is an opportunity for helping Runanga see the connection between planning and consenting and compliance, or as I like to say, compliance, planning, consenting. Because if we better understand what we need to do in compliance, and we're partnering with Runanga and understanding here are the risks around that, that helps inform what we need in the plan. And then that helps Aurora, her work in a sense. So I'm not sure how we want to engage with compliance and planning, how we do that together, but we're going to need to connect it to
That's good to know, because probably they've never really been in that space.
Yeah.
I mean, because you do a resource consent, goes into planning and things, and then all these conditions get done, and then it just off into the ether, so to speak. It never, there's no probably feedback coming back. Tell them how they, especially monitoring and then enforcement. I suppose enforcement, those actually the conditions that the Runanga put on actually being listened to, and then what is the outcome? So one of my questions was, how is that feedback loop going to go? But you're actually kind of starting it, with that, integrated planning program. I really liked how you said compliance, planning, and then the consent, and that's how probably the Runanga will probably see it as well. So thank you for this and kind of articulating that what you just said before, and then good luck moving forward. And if you need any help, Nook and I here to help.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being so brief on that. I'll have to follow this one. Can I just say, isn't it great to have a briefing in a public meeting that's accessible to the public? So well done to everyone involved with that, especially setting the agenda. Kilda. So I just wanted to say, well, first of all, I wanted to say, Jen, Eken's better off having staff like you. Fantastic. And I'd just like to say there's lots of Jens and Lens in the organisation too. So I just want to acknowledge all of them, especially Len. So my question sort of follow on from Councillor Cremel. So do we have sufficient resourcing of monitoring and incident resource staff? It's probably more you, Steve. Putting Jen on the spot.
I mean, through the chair, that there is what this improvement project will flush out. Yeah, all right. So until you have figured out how you really want to do this piece of the business, including some of the changes that Jen talked about, which that they are systematic around the way that they're wanting to approach things based on achieving outcomes and looking at things in a risk-based way. And I mean, I think about regulation. If you think about regulation through the likes of the IRD, they don't take a one-size-fits-all approach to every single person's IRD information, do they, in terms of their annual returns and stuff? They take a risk-based approach, but they know that they're doing regulation across all of it. So that's what we're going to do in terms of figuring out how we do that better, and that will determine how much resource we need. So probably an LTP conversation.
I was going to say fantastic, because certainly some of the people I talk to in the East would know where I'm coming from as well. There's not enough, there's never enough, you're never available, whatever it may be. So we know that it's a contrary. Anyway, my second question, and I will be brief, is if I got this right, you said 52% of incident responses were discharge, and of that 40% were odour. Any particular geographic location for that odour complaint numbers? I'm hoping it's the East. Well, I'm not hoping, I'm presuming it's the East.
To the chair, we do have it, but I don't have it on hand. I know that over over half of the incidents were in Christchurch, but I also know that wash strike is an issue down south. We can get those numbers if you like.
Could that be one of, thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Eva. I like your thinking around managing those accounts, and I just think to go a little bit further. Are you actually considering the roles of collectives, dairy industry, the audits, and other stuff where farmers already have to prove, or land users already have to prove their compliance, banking industry, because I think that we shouldn't be doubling up. I would hate to see us doubling up when that information is actually already there, and we just need to work better. And some of it's actually enforced on by us through a consenting process anyway.
Through the chair. There's probably a couple of things in there. So we're starting with the irrigation scheme because we just have to start somewhere. But we know that how we do account management, we will have to, there will be all sorts like quarries, you know, in a more urban sense, and then collectives. Why wouldn't we? What was the other thing? But the farming land use consents from a compliance perspective. So those 1,200 farming land use consents that we monitor 100% of them because they're required to demonstrate compliance through an audited farm environment plan. So from a compliance perspective, the risk level would be quite low from a compliance perspective, because we are monitoring them. We know whether they've been audited and we know what grade they have. So an understanding of that activity is very good. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were referring to, Councillor Mackay.
I'm just hoping, probably more a comment than a question now, but that you are going to work with the assurance programs that are already out there, and certainly in the rural. I'm not so familiar with assurance programs in a urban setting, and I'm quite sure there are some around stormwater and wastewater systems and maybe quarrying as well. But you don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Through the chair, you talked about a customer focused and account management approach. To me, that there is one of the lenses you put over that to figure out how do you efficiently engage with people and ensure you don't duplicate.
Team, it's now 10 to 1. We'd like to be finished by 1 o'clock, so then we can be back here for briefings at 1:30. So there's still small questions, but can you keep them very, very brief and succinct, and maybe some of them may have to be asked at a later stage. So start with.
Yeah, I've got 5 questions. I'd like to run some emails through, but I'll start with the first one. I'll read them backwards or kind of prioritize them. So in terms of that cost recovery, currently 25%, increasing to 44% is our target for financial year 26. Seems like a very slow improvement towards 60 to 80%, which it should be. Of course, that's an ongoing annual cost to the general ratepayer, quite substantial because it's quite big cost in there. So is there something that we could do to speed up that improvement? And if so, what?
Through the chair, yes, I think it's minor improvements that we can make in our current cost recovery. However, I think we need to review or to relook at based on a better understanding of what the actual work of compliance is now. I do not think our current approach is fit for purpose. And so meaning I don't think it reflects the current work of compliance. And so we can hound staff and say, you need to charge, but we've asked them to achieve outcomes. So the perverse outcome of the previous approach to saying you have to monitor a certain volume of consents was non-compliance was not resolved. It sat there for years. And so if we have to acknowledge that if we push them too hard, it means that outcomes will not be achieved because we are not resolving non-compliance, which is exactly what you have asked for in the long-term plan and the new service measures, is ensuring we're resolving non-compliance because we want to achieve outcomes. So I think I don't have the answer, but I can see now through the work that we've been doing, we have to relook at how this is funded.
Then in terms of the table one has got split between monitoring and which is consents, and then incidents, which presumably a proportion of incidents are on consented properties, and a proportion, I would assume, are on properties that are on the permitted activities. So therefore, for the consent, they're presumed to be complying with the conditions that are enable them to be permitted. Have you looked at that in terms of what proportions of those incidents occur in those two contexts? And the reason why I'm going to is because I've asked the question that Councillor Swiggs has asked before. I'm really pleased to see this paper because I've asked about this stuff now for, this is my second term of asking a lot of questions on this. And in theory, Councillor Swiggs is saying, from a strategic point of view, trying to reduce the number of consents, i.e. give more, essentially have more permitted activities with conditions and so on. But if we're finding that actually a lot of the incidents and the environmental harm, because there's a higher proportion of infringement and abatement notices going to those incidents, if they're occurring in those permitted activity spaces, then actually there's a risk to reducing consents and permitting more, isn't there? I'm understanding that context. So are we working on that? What's the balance, and how do we work out how to reduce consents, focus our attention on compliance that's got the risks associated with environmental, social harm, whilst reducing all this sort of paperwork and bureaucracy and sort of like, how do we? Is that part of that? That's the looping up, isn't it? That's the connecting the framework, the compliance, the consents, consent conditions, and so on.
Yeah, I just wonder, in the interest of time, if you're okay, if we come back to you with a written response on that, Councillor Southwest. Yeah,
thank you.
Because you are right, but there is some complexity there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I realise that.
Would you be happy to email the rest of your questions? What do you want to?
I'd like to ask a question about the high priority consents, because those still seem to be overly represented in the moderate to high non-compliance. And I'm curious about that, because in my head, I would think the high priority consents would be often large businesses doing significant, active, who would also then have the facility to employ people to be doing their correct checking on their conditions and consent compliance and so on, and yet it doesn't seem to be reflected from the stats that I'm seeing in this paper in terms of compliance. So what's the problem there? Why are so many of the high priority consents not achieving at least that level of compliance, even average? They actually seem to be worse than average, which is interesting and quite concerning to me.
Through the chair, this was predictable and what I would have expected. So these are high priority consents. They are not high risk consents or large scale. They are a priority because some of them have existing non-compliance and therefore got on the list because they're non-compliant. And so it was a predictable outcome, and exactly what we wanted, to find, that we're, or hoping to find, that we were actually identifying the non-compliance, which it is showing that we had a higher percentage of non-compliance in high priority consents versus other monitoring. So from a compliance outcome perspective, it is a good outcome because we're resolving the non-compliance.
That's really helpful to know for my interpretation what meant. Thank you.
Yeah, I've just got on point 38, the overall consent farm campaign, a lot of the most targeted farming land use consents. Is there any reason why there must be some that aren't? 2017 to 2020, so there must be, you use most, but I assume there's some that aren't. Is there any reasons why there aren't, and what's being done to try and?
Through the chair, There's one main simple reason is we don't know where all the farms are, and we also don't know which farms need consent. So the consent conditions don't make it clear, or the planning framework doesn't make it clear, here's the farms that require consent. However, we used those station targeted campaigns, said greater than 50 hectares of irrigation. We could identify all of them because they all have water permits with us. The other ones, when it got down to, well, are they this many kg of nitrogen? Well, how do we find them? And so the way that we're finding the remaining, so we did massive, I don't know if it was around this massive communications campaign. I remember Tafflin saying, Jennifer, you took all of our communications budget. It was huge. And so a huge effort to ensure there was awareness. I cannot guarantee that all of them are there. However, in our day-to-day BAU work, when we're interacting, with land managers, or we're out on farm through a compliance monitoring visit, we do pick them up. Also, when all those consents that you saw that required renewal, that Aurora put up there, they will, if they require a renewal, they will also get picked up in that process. We do have one irrigation scheme that does not have their discharge consent, but they're in the process now. That's
very, very briefly, and you can write this back to as an email, kind of what Vicky was saying, is that relationship between the compliance and the monitoring. And I'm thinking from the point of view from quarries, if the consents that we have and the conditions that we have on those consents for compliance and monitoring don't actually result in the results that the community have an expectation, are there issues not necessarily with the consent or the conditions, but actually the planning framework that we've put in that would enable those conditions? I think that's something that I'd like to understand a little bit more. That's way too big to answer from here, but that goes back to the earlier questions that I was asking before. So,
Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora, Chair. Would look just very, very briefly, because I know that Councillor Cranwell has actually hit on this. I'm going to be really interested to see what comes out of Arawhenua with that hui. But Jen, thank you for your paper, very comprehensive. But I know that we're talking right across the board here. But one of the things that actually is going to move the dial for Papatupu Runanga is actually around this whole compliance, planning and consenting around their land. But you really need to understand actually the historical context of it as well. And also the fact is that you're talking about Papatupu Runanga, but the mana whakahaere actually, it rests with the landowners, which is quite different from the Papatupu Runanga. So I'm looking forward. We can't do this today, I know, because we've got very, very little time. But I think that we need to have a really good conversation about this with the two, with Yayan and myself. And we need to actually be taking that out to the Papatupu and then actually engaging with, Rapaki has a landowners committee and all of these are the kind of people, because they see you coming in here, and you're absolutely right. For Papatupu Runanga, this is not fit for purpose. It isn't. And so that's what we need to work on. And we can really move the dial on this one, because when you look at all the land around, available land, for use, for housing and all of that, a lot of it's on the Papatupu Runanga, and it's all cleared. It's not cleared title, so you got Māori Land Court and all of that. But I think this is a really good start, so thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Edge, and I want to insult you, but can you keep up?
Just two, I won't ask a question, just two quick comments, thing. I haven't got time for questions. I really like page 26, item 50, where it talks about a direction to a more strategic approach to compliance and the outcomes and outcome measures. I like on page 27, item 60, where it talks about compliance of customer activities rather than consent. It's almost like a license to operate and get the system right from the beginning and avoid that non-compliance. So I think that's really good. And I think what Councillor Swig said early on, just reviewing this activity by activity thing for one farm just seems wrong. And we could perhaps be a bit more inventive and creative.
Thank you. Jennifer and Stephen, got, I mean, it's been some lots of amazing information there and thank you, councillors, for all the excellent discussion. Now us, Stephen and Jennifer, to leave the table. Thank you. Awesome. Motions up that the Regional Government Committee received the compliance program update and the territory compliance improvement project, which is the next steps and the progress process, including risk-based approaches and a specific location identification of target categories to be the focus of compliance work programs and develop future metrics for compliance performance. Find someone to move that motion. Thanks, Councillor Edge. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Is there any discussion?
You did to say yes, but I won't.
I'd just like to say I am so pleased to see this. This is probably the best place I've seen in 5 years here. Really pleased. Thank you to the team for putting it together and just showing us that we're heading in that direction. I think we can do so much with this together.
So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Motion carried. Next regional delivery meeting will be on the 8th, 16th of October, 2024. And now I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your attendance.